Today, we're going to dive into a fascinating biblical timeline that you've probably never heard before. It's all about the destiny of a nation that's always in the news, Iran. But, according to the interpretation we're looking at, Iran's story is way more complex and way more ancient than most people ever realize.
So when you think of ancient Iran, the name that probably comes to mind is Persia. And you're not wrong. But that's really only half the story. See, there's another name, an older one, that is the absolute key to unlocking a forgotten prophecy, a 4-act drama that spans thousands of years.
And that name is Elam. The name itself just means highlands, and it points to the region that would one day become the heart of the Persian Empire. So in the biblical text, anytime you see the name Elam, it's a direct pointer to the very beginnings of Iran. You're going to want to remember that name because it is the key to this entire story.
Okay, so what's so interesting is how this whole story kicks off. For centuries, the Empire of Iran, or Persia, actually plays a surprisingly positive role in the biblical narrative. It shows up as this unlikely protector and even a restorer for the Jewish people.
Just look at this pattern. First, you've got 539 BC. Cyrus the Great of Persia doesn't just conquer Babylon, he actually frees the Jewish people who are held captive there. Then, fast forward about 60 years. Right in the heart of the Persian court, a Jewish queen, Esther, saves her entire people from being wiped out. And then just a few decades after that, another Persian king gives his trusted advisor, Nehemiah, the green light and the funding to go and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem.
And what's so crucial here is that this wasn't just some political move. In his official decree, which is recorded in the book of Ezra, Cyrus doesn't just say, "Okay, you can go." He comes right out and says that the God of heaven has charged him with rebuilding the temple. He actually saw himself as playing a part in a divine plan.
So this pattern of Persia as a deliverer is pretty remarkable. But it doesn't stop there. The story then evolves and Persia takes on an even more significant role, that of a worshiper.
Think about the Magi, the wise men from the Christmas story. While the Bible doesn't spell out their nationality, the interpretation we're looking at argues that all the evidence points to them coming from the Persian Empire. I mean, these guys were scholars of astronomy and prophecy, and they very likely knew the writings of the prophet Daniel, who had served in that exact court centuries earlier. They travel this incredible distance, not to conquer, but to worship.
But this incredible pattern of protection and worship, well, it wasn't destined to last. The story was about to take a really dramatic and prophesied turn.
Yeah, a huge plot twist was written into the script hundreds of years ahead of time. The nation that was once a deliverer would eventually be cast in the role of an enemy.
The first real sign of this dark turn comes from the prophet Daniel. He has this vision of a powerful ram, which represents the Medo-Persian Empire, and it seems totally unstoppable. But then, out of nowhere, a goat from the west, symbolizing Greece under Alexander the Great, comes flying in and completely shatters the ram. It was a vision that predicted the end of Persia's golden age with just stunning accuracy. But the twist actually goes even deeper. The prophet Ezekiel, who was writing centuries earlier, describes a future end-times war against Israel, and he names the specific nations that will form this coalition. And, yep, right there on the list is a familiar name, Persia. The protector is now prophesied to become an enemy. It's a complete 180 from its original role.
So we have this really clear narrative arc, deliverer to worshiper and then to enemy. But that's not where the story ends. And this brings us to the climax of this interpretation, a prophecy that, it's argued, almost nobody talks about.
And here it is, from the prophet Jeremiah. After predicting judgment, the Bible gives this final word. But in the latter days, I will restore the fortunes of Elam. Remember Elam? That's the ancient foundational name for Iran. So the prophecy doesn't end with judgment, it actually ends with restoration.
Okay, so the obvious question is, how could a 2,600-year-old prophecy about restoring the fortunes of Elam possibly be happening right now, in our lifetime?
Well, the source we're exploring points to this number as the evidence, and this is the low-end estimate for Christian converts inside Iran today. To put that in perspective for you, back in 1979, before the revolution, there were thought to be only about 500 known Christians in the entire country.
So this absolutely dramatic spiritual shift, happening under some of the most intense circumstances imaginable, is presented by the source as the modern-day fulfillment of that ancient promise to restore the fortunes of Elam.
So, what's the big picture here? What's the main takeaway from this epic, millennia-spanning story? Well, the source argues that it reveals a consistent 4-act pattern.
So let's just recap the 4 acts. First, Iran is the deliverer, through kings like Cyrus. Second, it's the worshiper, through the Magi. Third, it becomes the prophesied enemy in a future coalition. And finally, the fourth act, redeemed, with its fortunes restored in the last days. It's this incredible journey from ally to adversary and then to a final, stunning restoration.
The source draws one last really powerful parallel here. Cyrus, a Persian king, was called God's anointed one for a very specific task, to open the physical gates of Babylon and free a captive nation. Well, the gospel message presents Jesus as the ultimate anointed one who opens the spiritual gates of death itself to free all people.
And this really brings us to the final thought. This entire explainer has been tracing the story of a nation, but the source suggests this pattern isn't just for nations. I mean, if a nation that was prophesied to face judgment can find a path to redemption, what might that imply for each of us as individuals? That's something to think about. Thanks for watching.